If you are dealing with a very specific kind of modern exhaustion today, you are definitely going to want to tune into this deep dive.
Oh, absolutely. It is something pretty much everyone is feeling right now, whether they realize it or not.
Right. Because, you sit down at your computer, you open up a tool that is supposedly designed to make your life infinitely easier, and suddenly you are just hit with a wall of tasks.
Just an absolute avalanche of decisions.
Exactly. Toggles, parameter sliders, drop-down menus. You just wanted a quick answer, and instead you feel like you've basically been handed a second job as a systems administrator.
It is a profound irony of the current tech landscape. I mean, you are handed this unprecedented computational power, and yet your daily experience of interacting with it is incredibly burdensome.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, the cognitive load required just to figure out, like, how to structure your prompt or manage your context window, it has skyrocketed. You're doing all the heavy lifting to accommodate the machine.
Rather than the other way around. And that dynamic is exactly what we're focusing on today. We are exploring a rather provocative question regarding all these tools you use every day. Like, is the relentless industry-wide push for more features in artificial intelligence actually ruining your user experience?
Right. Are these companies building smarter machines, but essentially designing miserable environments for you to use them in?
Exactly. It's a critical question for anyone trying to leverage technology to think or work or create. You really have to wonder if feature density is actually just a substitute for thoughtful design.
And to guide this exploration, we have an incredibly fascinating piece of source material today.
We do. It's an article from Tech-Reader magazine dated June 29, 2026. It's by Aaron Rose, and it's titled The Architecture of Calm, Inflection Pi, and the Case for Human First Design.
Such a great title. And what makes Rose's analysis so compelling is that he profiles a company that looked at the entire trajectory of the AI industry and basically decided to sprint in the exact opposite direction.
Just a hard pivot away from the norm. Because, the broader context here is the benchmark war, right? Almost every major player in the space has been locked in this escalating battle.
Oh, yeah. It's all about proving they can process the most data or integrate the most plugins or generate the most complex enterprise code.
But Inflection AI made a highly counterintuitive bet against that feature density. They drew a really hard line between raw computation and actual human conversation.
And looking closely at the architecture of their flagship product, which is called Pi, it challenges everything you probably assume about what makes a piece of software advanced.
Totally. So Aaron Rose starts by diagnosing this baseline reality that you are probably living in right now. He describes the average AI interface today as a control panel masquerading as a conversation.
Which is such a spot-on way to describe it.
Right. Reading that, the anxiety of prompt engineering really comes into focus. When you open a standard chatbot today, you're greeted by sidebars bristling with integrations.
You have to select which version of the model you want from a dropdown.
Yeah, and you're navigating toggle switches for creative versus precise output. You're staring at upload limits, export buttons, share configurations. It's a lot.
Rose actually points out that the experience feels less like speaking to a helpful assistant and more like, well, piloting a commercial airliner.
Which is terrifying if you don't know how to fly.
Right, exactly.
Well,
Now, if your specific goal is to calculate orbital mechanics or parse a massive database, then sure, that level of control is necessary.
right, you need all those buttons.
But if you were simply trying to, think out loud or brainstorm a rough concept, that interface is incredibly alienating. It introduces friction before you have even typed a single word.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because the analogy that immediately came to my mind reading Rose's breakdown was this. Opening a chatbot today feels like stepping into a restaurant, but instead of a waiter handing you a menu, they hand you a blowtorch, a whisk, and a list of ingredient supply chains.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is perfectly put.
Right. You are forced to build the kitchen before you can even get a meal. You have to curate the plugins and optimize the parameters before you're even allowed to just say hello.
And it is like being handed a blowtorch, but worse, because it's a blowtorch that charges you by the compute second.
Oh, man, yeah.
The cognitive tax you are paying there isn't just a minor annoyance. It has a measurable psychological impact. And this brings up a really well-known concept in user interface design called Hicks' law.
Hicks' law. Okay, lay that out for us.
So the law essentially states that the time and energy it takes for you to make a decision increases logarithmically with the number and complexity of choices presented to you.
Which makes total sense.
Right. So every single toggle and drop-down menu on that screen is a micro decision your brain has to process before it can actually get to the real work.
And Rose points out that this frantic energy of the interface has actually bled into the underlying models themselves. The AI has internalized all that complexity.
Yeah, the interface literally dictates the behavior.
Yeah.
Because the UI is built like a command line terminal, the output behaves like this incredibly anxious operating system that's just desperately trying to prove its worth to you.
Which perfectly sets the stage for Inflection's Pi. Because tucked away from this massive feature-obsessed arms race, Pi presents a fundamentally different approach.
A total paradigm shift.
If you open Pi, the first thing Rose notes is what is entirely absent from the screen, like no sidebars, no dashboards, no parameter sliders, nothing.
The absence of those elements is a very deliberate architectural choice. What you are actually presented with is just clean, linear text.
Yeah.
It's floating in all this generic white space using warm, highly approachable typography. The interface literally and psychologically breathes.
It's just visually quiet.
Exactly. It removes the visual noise that triggers that Hicks law cognitive overload we just talked about.
It doesn't demand a single thing from you. Like, it doesn't ask for a file upload or a workflow optimization.
Yeah.
It just sits there.
But you really have to understand the mechanics of why this works. This is not just some designer saying, hey, let's make it look minimalist and trendy for the aesthetic.
Right. There's science behind it.
Yes. By stripping away that metaphorical restaurant kitchen you described earlier, Pi shifts your neurological baseline.
Okay, wow.
You are no longer in this heightened state of task completion where your working memory is constantly taxed by managing an environment. The reduction in visual stimuli actually lowers the cortisol spikes associated with context switching.
That is wild.
It creates a vacuum, essentially, and that vacuum invites genuine conversation.
It really proves that software can be authoritative without being, imposing. But this minimalist philosophy clearly doesn't stop at the visual layout, because a quiet interface wouldn't mean much if the AI still just screamed at you in its responses.
Right, if it was visually quiet but textually overwhelming.
Exactly. The visual restraint actually dictates how the AI paces its communication. Rose contrasts Pi's pacing with what he calls the fire hose problem that you see everywhere else.
And the fire hose is a highly accurate metaphor for modern data retrieval. The industry assumption right now is that more information delivered faster is inherently better.
Which leads to the models being trained to maximize token output per query, right?
Precisely.
The examples in the article are painfully recognizable. Like, you ask one of these standard AIs a casual question about Shakespeare, and it spits out a dense, multi-page term paper.
Oh yeah, complete with historical context you didn't ask for.
Right. Or you ask a simple question about meal prep, and suddenly you are scrolling through an entire week's worth of recipes, complete with full nutritional breakdowns, bolded headers, macro calculations for every single ingredient. It is an overwhelming blast of data.
It really is.
But wait, I have to push back here a little bit. Didn't you and I, and frankly the rest of the market, specifically ask for that? I mean, we've spent the last 2 decades Googling things, right? Trying to optimize our search terms to extract the absolute maximum amount of information possible in a fraction of a second. We want comprehensive answers immediately. Why is it suddenly a bad thing that the AI is acting like a fire hose of knowledge? Haven't we trained ourselves to want the term paper?
That's a really fair point. If your sole objective is pure data retrieval, then yes, a fire hose is incredibly efficient. But Rose's article makes a really crucial distinction here about cognitive processing.
Okay, what's the distinction?
Pi operates on the assumption that you are seeking a dialogue, and human dialogue relies on rhythm. The human brain just does not process complex information effectively when it is dumped on you in a single monolithic block.
Because it forces you to parse through all that noise just to find the actual insight.
Exactly. It creates an obligation. When you receive a 5-page output, your brain immediately registers it as a massive reading assignment.
Ah, yes. Homework.
Right. So Pi's underlying engineering assumes that sometimes a single, well-chosen sentence is exponentially more valuable than a comprehensive dissertation. So, instead of the fire hose, Pi radically restricts its output. The responses are brief, they're highly focused, and they are digestible.
And it pauses. That was the detail in Rose's analysis that really jumped out to me. It listens completely, responds precisely to the specific thing you said, and then it stops.
It waits.
Yeah, it waits for you to guide the next turn in the dialogue.
That deliberate pause is honestly the architectural equivalent of making eye contact. It is a signal to you that the AI is not just rushing to fulfill a query and close the support ticket, it is actively holding the conversational space open for your reaction.
Think about your own experience texting people. There is always that one particularly thoughtful friend who you just know is actually reading your messages.
So for sure.
They aren't just like waiting for their turn to speak so they can dump their own thoughts on you. They respond to your specific point and then they leave space for you to reply. Pi mimics that dynamic perfectly.
And doing so induces a state of psychological safety. The friction of the machine falls away, allowing you to simply think out loud. And, if the text pacing feels like texting that thoughtful friend, the audio feature that Rose explores next takes that illusion into entirely new territory.
Okay, yeah, here is where the engineering gets wildly ambitious. The text-to-speech engine on Pi is not just some accessibility feature buried in a submenu. By default, the voice is just on. It greets you, ready to speak.
Now, you have undoubtedly interacted with AI voices before. I mean, digital assistants have been in our phones and smart speakers for over a decade.
Right, but there is always a tell. Like, you can always spot the subtle robotic artifacts. The intonation is just slightly off, or it puts the emphasis on the wrong syllable, or the cadence is weirdly flat. You always know you are talking to a script-reading algorithm.
Yes, that uncanny feeling. But Rose argues that Pi's auditory layer completely breaks that paradigm. It captures these soft, dynamic inflections.
Yeah.
It has the natural ebb and flow of a living speaker.
Yeah.
But the most significant engineering feat, by far, is the inclusion of rhythmic breaths.
Wait, really?
Yeah, you actually hear the AI inhale slightly before speaking, or pause to take a breath mid-sentence.
Now, I have to challenge this because reading about simulated breathing triggers a massive alarm bell for me. Does making an AI physically breathe like simulating lungs that obviously do not exist cross the line into the uncanny valley? Is it creepy to fake biological functions, or is that the secret mechanism that makes you drop your guard?
Honestly, it is the latter, and it all comes down to evolutionary biology and the parasympathetic nervous system.
Okay, unpack that.
Well, those simulated breaths are not just a quirky aesthetic choice. They are an essential biological cue. Your brain has been hardwired over millions of years to respond to specific auditory signals of safety and presence. When you hear a natural breath, an inflection, a slight pause for thought, it directly activates mirror neurons in your brain.
So it literally tricks your nervous system into mirroring that calm state.
It absolutely does. It triggers a completely different neural pathway than when you read cold text or hear a monotone synthesizer. When you hear a calm breath, your own breathing tends to subconsciously align with it. It physically lowers your heart rate.
Wow.
And it entirely removes the mechanical sensation of querying. Rose describes this specific phenomenon where that barrier just dissolves. You stop feeling like you're operating a piece of software, and you find yourself in a mental space where you're just talking.
You aren't rushing to fill the silence with more data because the voice on the other end isn't rushing you.
Yeah.
Rose does mention you can turn the voice off with the single tap if you prefer silence, but he notes that most users choose not to. It is this small miracle of acoustic engineering that completely reframes your relationship with the machine.
It really is a masterclass in human-centric design. But, there is a harsh reality here that Rose pivots to in the article. Because building a beautiful, psychologically attuned product does not grant you immunity from the brutal economics of the tech industry.
Right, and this transition in the article is quite jarring, because if the user experience is this revolutionary, you really have to wonder why Inflection AI, the company behind it, essentially cratered.
The corporate turbulence has been highly visible. Rose outlines the executive departures, the constantly shifting business strategies, and ultimately, those major headlines about Microsoft swooping in to acquire the company's top talent and leadership.
Right, and the narrative floating around the industry paints Inflection as this sort of cautionary tale. It is framed as a promising boutique product that simply could not survive the hyper-capitalist reality of generative AI.
Which is a very common story in tech right now.
So you have to confront the obvious question here. If the product story doesn't make money, the product ultimately dies, right? Isn't presence over utility just a really nice poetic way of saying Inflection couldn't afford the billions of dollars in GPUs required to compete with the raw horsepower of, say, OpenAI or Anthropic? If Pi can't debug production infrastructure or act as an enterprise data analyst, didn't it just lose the compute war?
Look, it is very easy to look at the Microsoft acquisition and conclude that Inflection failed because it lacked the raw computational muscle of its rivals. Compute costs for generative AI are astronomical, and enterprise contracts are usually what pay those server bills.
Right, you need the enterprise money.
But Rose makes a brilliant defense of the product's legacy here. He insists you have to separate the corporate story, which is all about business models and venture capital, from the product story, which is about human interaction.
Okay, defend the product story for me then. Because if they lost the business war, why does Pi still matter to us?
Well, because Pi is still online, it's still highly functional, and it's still used daily by people who find its specific, quiet rhythm totally indispensable. Rode argues that Pi was never trying to compete with the sheer horsepower of an enterprise coding assistant. It was deliberately playing a different game.
It was a principled stand against the assumption that utility is the only valid metric for software.
Precisely. Pi isn't meant for complex corporate research projects. Its lack of dense tool integrations is not a failure of engineering or lack of budget. It is quite literally a feature. The core philosophy driving the product is prioritizing presence over utility. The software assumes that you, sitting at the screen, are a human being first and a user second.
Presence over utility. That phrasing from Rose really crystallizes the whole argument for me. It recognizes that you don't always need a machine to execute a task for you.
Right.
Sometimes you just need a machine to hold space so you can process your own thought. You don't always need a high-powered analyst. Sometimes you just need a sounding board that won't bombard you with bullet points.
And in a tech landscape defined entirely by relentless feature accumulation, choosing not to add a feature is an act of rebellion. The decision to omit buttons and dashboards is a deliberate, protective measure for your cognitive load.
Rose frames the very existence of Pi as a provocation to the entire software industry. It directly challenges the default assumption that every new toggle, every new integration, and every single update automatically adds value to your life.
Which they usually don't.
No, they usually just add stress. It serves as proof that the most sophisticated tools are not necessarily the ones that execute the most functions. The truly sophisticated tools are the ones that understand exactly when to step back, clear away the visual and auditory noise, and simply make space for genuine human exchange.
And look, not every artificial intelligence model needs to be Pi. There is absolutely a place in your workflow for the complex, utility-driven models that can write thousands of lines of code.
Sure, we need those too.
But the broader lesson you should take from Pi is the power of restraint. In an era of constant digital overwhelm, understanding how to design for calm is arguably more important than achieving a high benchmark score on some technical reasoning test.
That is the core takeaway from you as you navigate the endless stream of new tools being pushed onto your devices right now. The next time you open a new piece of software, take a critical look at it. Ask yourself, is this tool giving me a menu? Or is it handing me a blowtorch?
Right. Is it making space for my thoughts, or is it demanding that I manage its environment?
Exactly. You have the right to demand software that respects your cognitive load rather than just exploiting it.
It fundamentally shifts how you should evaluate the technology in your life. But, looking at how successfully Pi simulates this perfect, calm presence raises an incredibly important question. One that Rose points toward, but really leaves you to grapple with entirely on your own.
Oh, let's hear it.
If technology can now perfectly simulate the calm, attentive, beautifully paced presence of a friend who listens deeply, who never interrupts, and who always focuses entirely on your specific needs, what happens to your patience for real human conversations?
Oh, wow.
Right. Because real human interaction is inherently messy. It is impatient. It is full of awkward interruptions, self-centered tangents, and frustrating misunderstandings. If your nervous system gets too accustomed to the perfect architecture of calm provided by a machine, will you lose your tolerance for the beautiful friction of real life?
That is a phenomenal question. A perfectly curated digital companion that inadvertently makes you less equipped to deal with the messy reality of the actual people in your life. That is definitely something for you to chew on the next time you find yourself opening up a chat window for a quick conversation. Thank you so much for joining this deep dive. As you move forward with your day, maybe take a direct cue from Pi's design. Step back from the control panels, ignore the endless toggles for just a minute, take a real deep breath, and allow yourself to just enjoy a moment of calm. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.